My name is Nathan Ford. I'm 36 years old and I used to be a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. That feels like a different life now, a different version of me who knew what he was supposed to do the moment his boots hit the ground. These days, I drift. I get up because I have to. I breathe because it's automatic. But I don't live, not really. I work a night shift at a loading dock, stacking boxes like it means something. I don't talk to people much. I smile when someone asks me how I'm doing. The truth is, I don't know how to answer. Every day bleeds into the next. There's no mission anymore. No clarity, no fire. Just this gray fog I walk through, hoping it lifts, but never expecting it to. Sometimes I sit in my truck long after a shift ends, staring at the steering wheel, trying to remember what it felt like to matter. Back then, I had a brotherhood, orders, purpose. Now I have silence. People talk about finding yourself after the military. I never found anything. I didn't lose myself in the war. I lost myself after. It's not just the noise I miss. It's the knowing. The sharp edges of urgency. The weight of someone counting on you. In civilian life, everything feels hollow. Last week, I was cleaning out my wallet, thinking I should probably toss all the old junk I'd carried for no reason. Receipts, expired punch cards, an old note from a guy in my unit. Then I saw it. A folded piece of paper, creased and soft with age. No date, no name, just a line of writing in faded black ink. Come back when you're ready to start over. I stared at it like it was alive, like it had been waiting. The handwriting looked familiar, though I couldn't quite place it. But the words, those 6 words, hit me harder than any deployment ever did. I must have shoved it in there years ago and forgotten, or maybe I just didn't want to remember. Come back when you're ready to start over. I don't even know where back is. But suddenly, the idea of going somewhere, anywhere felt like more than I've allowed myself to want in a long time. Starting over. What does that even look like when you've already lived through hell and come back empty? I sat there in the dark, engine off, holding that paper like it might crumble. Part of me wanted to laugh, another part wanted to cry. I hadn't felt anything that strongly in months, maybe years. That night, I didn't sleep. I just kept reading the message over and over, and sometime before dawn, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was headed, but for the first time in forever, I wasn't just waiting for life to happen to me. I was going to find out what starting over really meant. I almost didn't go. Even with the paper in my hand, the address scribbled in small faded ink, it felt crazy. But something in me was louder than doubt. So I threw my bag in the truck, filled the tank, and pointed north. It took almost 2 days. The roads got smaller, tighter, houses thinned out, trees thickened. I passed the last gas station an hour before I even saw a mailbox. Vermont in October is something else. The colors hit you like a wave: fire red, sharp yellow, deep rust, and the air smells like wood smoke and clean silence. I was starting to think the address led nowhere when the gravel road finally ended. In front of me stood an old cabin tucked between 2 massive oaks. It looked like it had been there for 100 years. The wood was aged but solid. There was a swing on the porch, still swaying like someone had just stepped off it. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. My hands didn't move. It wasn't fear, exactly, just a strange quiet pressing into me. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, it feels like it's waiting. I got out, boots crunching the gravel. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a second, I thought I heard my name. That's how weird it felt, like the forest itself knew I was coming. I climbed the steps and raised my hand to knock. But before I could, the door opened. A woman stood there, maybe in her late 30s, wearing a wool sweater and calm eyes that had seen things. She looked at me like I was late for something important. "You're finally here." That's all she said. No name, no questions. Just those words, like she'd been expecting me. My throat tightened. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She stepped aside, and I walked in. The cabin smelled like cedar and coffee. The light was soft, golden. There were books everywhere, blankets, a long wooden table with half-finished letters spread across it. It felt lived in, but not messy, quiet, but not dead. She told me her name was Ellie. She didn't ask why I came. She didn't need to. She said this place was built for guys like me, veterans who made it back but never really returned. Men with scars no one could see and weight they didn't know how to drop. This isn't therapy, she said. It's something older than that. You help with the firewood. You write what you can't say. You listen when someone else can't find the words. You stay until the noise in your head quiets enough to hear something real. She didn't give me a timeline. No expectations. Just a room upstairs, some firewood to split, and a cup of strong coffee on the table. I walked outside after she showed me around, stood on the porch and looked out at the trees. It felt like the air was thicker here, like it wrapped around you instead of passing by. I didn't know what I'd stepped into, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like running. I hadn't meant to wander. I was just looking for a mug in the kitchen and ended up walking past a hallway I hadn't noticed before. The floor creaked under my boots, and the air got quieter the deeper I went. Then I saw it. The wall stretched across the whole side of the room, covered with photos, letters, and old journals stacked on narrow wooden shelves. Dozens of lives pinned to one space, faces of men and women in uniform, standing next to campfires, holding children, smiling awkwardly into cameras. But the war wasn't what they talked about. The letters were all about after. After the noise, after the medals, after the silence hit so hard they thought they wouldn't make it. There were confessions written in shaky handwriting, poems scribbled on the backs of receipts, photos of cabins and dogs and new babies. It felt sacred, not in a holy way, but in a human one. I ran my fingers across the edges of the frames, not to touch them, but to feel something real. These weren't war stories. They were survival stories. Not about dodging bullets, but about choosing to keep breathing on a Tuesday morning when it felt easier not to. Then I saw it. A small envelope tucked into a corner of the board, yellowed from time. My last name was written on it in thick, familiar letters. Ford. My stomach turned. I pulled it off the board, slowly, like it might break. The flap was already open, like someone knew I'd find it someday. I slid the letter out and sat down on the bench against the wall. His handwriting hadn't changed. It looked like the grocery lists he used to write when I was a kid. No date, no location, just words. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't known how to talk to me after I came back, that every time he looked at me, he saw his own reflection at that age and didn't know what to say. He said he hoped I found what he couldn't, a way back to myself, a place to rest. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the wetness hit my shirt. Not loud sobs, just silent, steady tears. He died before we ever had a real conversation about the things we both carried. But this letter, this piece of him somehow made me feel like he'd never truly left. He must have come here, sat on this same bench, looked at these same photos, maybe left one of his own. I didn't find it, but it didn't matter. He knew I'd come. That's why he left the receipt, why he wrote the note, why this place felt like it had been waiting for me. I folded the letter and put it back where I found it. My hands shook, but not from fear, from something softer. Like being seen for the first time in a very long time. I met the others over dinner. Ellie had made chili, and the whole place smelled like wood smoke and garlic. We sat around the big table, bowls in our hands, the fire crackling behind us. The first to speak was Travis. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and later I found out that was true. He said he scrubbed the floor every night before bed. Said the only thing that quieted his mind was the sound of bristles on wood. Then there was Mark. Younger than the rest of us, maybe 30. He didn't talk much at first. Just tapped his spoon on the edge of his bowl in rhythm. Later, I found out he played guitar when the nightmares got bad. Played until his fingers went numb just to fall asleep for 2 hours straight. Angela came in late. She smelled like sawdust and engine oil. Wore a baseball cap low over her eyes. I saw her in the shed the next morning carving a chessboard out of pine. Said it helped her think straight. said she didn't trust her own hands until they were holding a chisel. No one asked questions. No one needed to. We weren't there to fix each other. We were just there. That was enough. I watched how they moved, how they didn't flinch when someone dropped a plate, how no one needed to say they were tired or scared or hurting. It was understood. There was comfort in that silence. It didn't feel heavy. It felt like breathing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was losing my mind. I felt like maybe I was just human, a version of broken that didn't have to stay that way. They didn't offer advice. They just let me be. I think that was the point. You come here not to be told what to do. You come here to remember you're not the only one crawling through the dark. We didn't talk about the war. We talked about dogs and rain and bad coffee. We talked about the best kind of boots and the worst kind of country songs. It was simple, and it mattered. That night, as I lay in the bunk staring at the ceiling, I realized I wasn't alone in the noise anymore. There were other voices in the dark now, and none of us were whispering. I started writing because I didn't know what else to do. It began one morning with a sentence scrawled on the back of an old receipt. I didn't even remember writing it until I found it later in my pocket. It said, "I'm still here, but I don't know why." After that, I kept going. Ellie left an old notebook on the nightstand with a pen balanced across the top. No note, just the tools. That night I wrote for 2 hours. I didn't write about battles or medals. I wrote about the time I lost my temper at a grocery store because a kid popped a balloon behind me. I wrote about a dog I almost adopted in Fallujah and how I still dream about him curled at my feet. Each morning I filled more pages. My hand cramped. My thoughts stuttered. But the words came. I wrote about the men I lost. The smell of burning sand. The sound of silence after gunfire. I wrote about my mom's lasagna and how I couldn't eat it anymore without hearing explosions. I didn't share it with anyone at first. I didn't plan to. It was messy, full of half-thoughts and broken grammar. But it was mine. Ellie saw me one morning writing on the porch and said, "You ever think about sending that somewhere?" I laughed. She didn't. She told me about a small journal run by veterans, for veterans. No fluff, just truth. I sent one piece in. It was about a friend of mine who used to whistle the same 3 notes before every mission. I never knew why. He died in Ramadi. The night before, he made me promise to learn the song if anything happened. I never did. A month later, I got an email. They published it. Said they wanted more. I thought maybe 10 people would read it, maybe none. But then the letters came. They came in email, in handwritten envelopes, in messages folded inside care packages. From men who had been silent for decades. From women who said they finally understood what their husbands couldn't say. From kids who wanted to know why their dads came home different. One letter was from a 17-year-old girl. Her dad never talked about Iraq. She said after reading my story, he cried in front of her for the first time. She didn't say much else. Just, "Thank you for giving me my dad back." I cried the night I read that. Not the loud kind. Just the kind that makes your chest rise and fall like something broke and something healed at the same time. I didn't feel like a soldier or a victim or even a man with a past. I felt like a bridge. One voice reaching another. I wrote every day after that. Sometimes about nothing. Sometimes about everything. I wrote about trying to plant tomatoes in dry dirt and how that felt like therapy. I wrote about buying a used bike and crashing it into a mailbox and laughing until my ribs hurt. I wrote about healing not as a destination, but as something you walk through barefoot. Ellie printed out my favorite letters and pinned them to the wall near the old stove. She called it the response wall. I called it proof. Proof that staying alive meant more than surviving. Some of the guys in the cabin started writing too. Not all, not always. But some. Travis wrote a poem about his mop. Angela wrote about building furniture for her sister's baby. Mark wrote a song and played it at the fire pit one night. We clapped like it was Carnegie Hall. I still don't sleep through the night. I still jump at fireworks. I still carry ghosts. But now I carry voices too. And those voices remind me that the fight didn't end overseas. It just changed shape. One morning, I wrote this in my notebook. Maybe the war didn't take me, maybe it handed me the pen. And that's where I decided to begin again. I found the photo by accident. It was tucked inside an old book on the shelf near the fireplace. A man in uniform stood beside a little girl with wild curls and a missing front tooth. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. They were both smiling, but it felt like the kind of smile that tried too hard. Ellie noticed me holding it and didn't flinch. She sat down across from me and said, "That's my dad." Her voice didn't crack. It was calm, steady, like she'd told the story before. He served 2 tours, came back quiet, then quieter. One day, he went for a walk in the woods behind their house and never came back. They found his body months later. She was 13. No one had asked the right questions. No one offered help. He'd survived war, but not the silence that followed. That broke something in her. But instead of letting it harden, she built something out of it. She told me the cabin had been abandoned when she bought it. She used the money from her dad's small military pension and worked nights at a diner to fix it up. Piece by piece, room by room. She read everything she could about PTSD, trauma, and grief. And she talked to veterans, hundreds of them, not as a therapist, but as someone who wanted to understand. She didn't build the cabin to be a miracle. She built it to be enough. A roof, a fire, a place where no one had to explain why they couldn't sleep or why they cried at the sound of birds. A place her father might have stayed if it had existed. Listening to her, I didn't feel pity. I felt awe, not because she fixed everything, but because she showed up anyway. Every day, for strangers who didn't always have words, for ghosts she never met, for herself because it was the only way to break the cycle. I thanked her, not with a grand speech. Just a quiet nod and a hand on her shoulder, same way her father did in that photo. She smiled, and this time, it didn't try too hard. That night, I looked around the cabin and finally understood. Healing didn't come from forgetting the past. It came from someone choosing not to run from it. I didn't leave the cabin. I thought I would. Thought I'd stay for a few weeks, get my head right, and go back to whatever I thought was normal. But something shifted. Slowly, without announcement. The days didn't feel heavy anymore. The nights weren't so quiet they scared me. One morning, Ellie asked if I'd sit in on a new group session. Just to listen. I did. Then the next week, I spoke. Then the week after that, I led the circle. People started coming to me with their stories. Not because I had answers, but because I knew how to listen. Ellie and I started a weekly writing group. Nothing fancy. Just notebooks, pens, and coffee that burned your tongue if you weren't careful. We called it the table. Some wrote letters they'd never send. Some wrote poems. Others just scribbled one sentence and stared out the window. That was enough. Over time, the group grew. We added a second night. Then a weekend retreat. Local schools sent care packages. Someone donated laptops. A retired therapist volunteered. It wasn't a program. It was a pulse. Something real, steady, alive. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was helping others start. One guy told me he hadn't laughed in 4 years until someone misread their own writing and made a joke so bad it became an inside joke for months. Another woman said this was the first place where her silence didn't make people uncomfortable. I realized then what my mission was. It wasn't behind a rifle or inside a bunker. It was sitting on a porch with someone who couldn't speak and still making them feel heard. It was reading someone's words and nodding like their pain wasn't too much. It was letting survival mean something more than just not dying. I found my purpose in ink-stained pages and broken sentences. In the hush after someone finishes reading and no one claps, but everyone breathes a little easier. I wasn't saving lives. I was bearing witness. And sometimes, that's all someone needs to stay one more day. One night, I opened my father's letter again. The edges were soft now. The ink faded just enough to look like it belonged to another time. At the bottom, he'd written something I'd missed the first few times. Maybe I wasn't ready then, I was now. He wrote, "Surviving is not weakness. It's preparation. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket, not because I needed to carry it anymore, but because I wanted to remember where this all started. I didn't leave the war to forget it. I left so I could understand it, so I could turn it into something that made sense. I used to think missions ended when the fighting stopped. Now I know. Some missions begin with a pen.